To start our assembly today, we wish to acknowledge this land on which Branksome Hall operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and go to school on this land. Thank you to the Rock Band for a fantastic welcome to our guest speaker, writer and activist, Ms. Gloria Steinem. Ms. Steinem, Gloria, she asked me to call her Gloria, so I happily will. My name is Astrid Ling. I'm the head prefect at Branksome Hall and the MC and moderator of today's assembly. We are thrilled to have you with us today. You have honored us by coming to our school. Before we begin, I would like to invite our principal, Ms. Karen Jurevich, to the podium.
Thank you, Astrid. And isn't this a moment in history for Branksome Hall? Fantastic. I'm so delighted to have everybody here for this very special student assembly with feminist writer, lecturer, and political organizer, Gloria Steinem. Now, Gloria, I have a little story that I'd like to share. Last week, I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba, attending a conference, and part of the conference was at the Canadian Human Rights Museum, a relatively new, beautiful facility. And as we were touring with a group of fellow principals from across Canada, there was your photo, beautifully, beautifully displayed, beside Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop from South Africa, Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1984, and Chief Oren Lyons, faith keeper of the Turtle Island clan, Onondaga Nation, and Indigenous advocate. So it made you feel a little bit closer to Canada and to all of us when I had that opportunity. With tonight's event at Convocation Hall completely sold out, I don't need to tell you, our audience, how fortunate we are to have Ms. Steinem, Gloria, to ourselves at Branksome Hall this morning. We only need to look at the events of the past few weeks to know how far as a society we still need to go. More than ever, we can no longer ignore the volume of calls for greater gender equity, inclusion, and diversity. As an all-girls international baccalaureate school, Branksome Hall has a unique perspective on gender issues. We believe we can add value to the public conversation that's already swirling on these important topics. Our mission as a school is to nurture young women with the skills and the drive to shape a better world. The sad truth is, however, because of gender, our students still find the playing field they enter as graduates tilted against them. The obstacles are even steeper, of course, for young women and men of color, of Indigenous descent, who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, who live with physical or other disabilities, or who are economically disadvantaged. It is our responsibility to do all that we can to change this reality faced both here in Toronto and in Canada, and indeed around the world. Every year, Branksome welcomes renowned female educators and leaders such as Ariana Huffington, June Caldwood, Irene Rosenfeld, Carol Dweck, and Naomi Wolf to our campus to speak directly to our girls as part of the endowed Rachel Phillips Belash Speaker Series. This series is named in honor of our former principal, Rachel Phillips Belash, who herself is an inspiring thinker. I'm delighted to announce she traveled from New Mexico to be here with us today. Rachel, can you please stand and be acknowledged? It was always such a privilege and remains so for me to have followed in your footsteps, Rachel, so thank you. When our deputy principal, Mrs. Carrie Weinstock, suggested, let's invite Gloria Steinem to be our 2017 Rachel Phillips Belash speaker, I remember thinking, how perfect, but surely, she'll never accept. Well, much to our delight, Gloria, you did accept. And I am so proud and grateful to have you here with us today. And by the way, I'm not the only one. Here is a short video that our students have put together to welcome you to Branksome Hall.
Hi, Ms. Steinem. I'm Sophia.
And I'm Morgan.
And we are so excited to see you on Monday. Are you a feminist?
I'm definitely a feminist because all women should be equal to men. There's no reason why they shouldn't.
I'm definitely a feminist. I believe that women should have equal rights.
Yes, I am a feminist.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, I am a feminist.
Yes, 100% feminist.
Yes, I'm a feminist.
I'm a proud feminist.
In one word, what does feminism mean to you?
Oh man. Can I use two?
Of course.
Girl power.
Bravery.
Proud. Courage. Powerful.
Strong.
Equality.
Strength.
Feminism means advocacy.
Feminism means empowerment.
What's it like being a feminist at Branksome Hall?
At Branksome, being a feminist is just treating everybody equally, no matter who they identify as or what they believe in.
We're in a community where there are a lot of women around us who, even if we're not all feminists, we're all empowered and we all believe in our rights so that we have the opportunity to express these beliefs.
It's like being part of a community of a lot of people who think like I do.
If Gloria Steinem were here right now, what would you want to say to her?
I would ask her, why is it so important to empower young girls?
Thank you for inspiring so many young women to believe in what they can do.
Thank her for her strong fights for feminism, even when it was not as accepted as it is today.
I would tell her that she inspires me to become a feminist and other people around the world.
I'd probably want to thank her for being probably the best activist for women in the world.
She's like a huge role model to me and all women around the world.
Because of her, I'm going to be able to do so much more with my life.
Thank you so much for inspiring me.
Welcome to Branksome! Welcome to Branksome! Welcome to Branksome! Welcome to Branksome!
Gloria, I hope this video has given you a sense of the excitement that has been building ever since we learned about your visit. It has also sparked what you would refer to as talking circles, as we shared ideas, opinions, perspectives, and learned more every day about your life's work. Before we engage in a conversation with you today, I thought I would take a moment to introduce you to the Branksome community. Of course, we are an all-girls school, a Canadian school, and we are 114 years old. We are an international baccalaureate world school, but what you might not know is that at the heart of our identity are our values and our shared purpose as a community. We like to say that you can distinguish Branksome students, not by the answers they give, but by the questions they ask. We are curious and passionate, unafraid to ask difficult and uncomfortable questions. We are internationally minded and engage with communities both locally and globally. We are open-minded and value resilience over perfection. We value team success over personal gain. As everyday leaders, we see ourselves as citizens of our school and the world who look for innovative solutions to complex problems. We are a diverse community with a wide range of interests and perspectives, and we understand that our strength lies in working together to break down barriers where we see them. We are unified in our determination to make the world better. We believe this is a unique time in the history of women's equality where discussions must continue to ignite action. Having you here today will inspire us and give us direction. Before I invite Gloria to the stage, we'd like to play the short video that introduces her.
This is no simple reform. It really is a revolution.
My childhood taught me to live with uncertainty because my father's philosophy was if you don't know what will happen tomorrow, it could be wonderful. I don't want to make young women feel there are no obstacles. That's a lie. There are obstacles. It's not so good when we say to kids, you can be anything you want, because it's not true. Much better to say you should be able to become anything you want, and overcoming these obstacles is going to be so satisfying and so much fun, and you're going to have so much company. People keep asking me, but who I'm going to give my torch to, right? And I always say to them, I am not giving up my torch, thank you very much. I'm keeping my torch, and I'm using it to light other people's torches.
Remember, the Constitution does not begin with I, the President. It begins with we, the people. We are here and around the world for a deep democracy that says we will not be quiet, we will not be controlled, we will work for a world in which all countries are connected.
Everyone, please join me in warmly welcoming Gloria Steinem to the podium.
I feel I've arrived in a kind of heaven. We have something very special right now, which is a little time in this room together in a combination of people that has never happened before and will never happen again in quite the same way. Each of us is a combination of heredity and environment that is unique inside here. That could never have happened before and could never happen again. And yet we share humanity, right? So this is a big talking circle, and I'm looking forward to making this a two-way street, because in my experience, pretty much everything that moves us forward in life comes out of talking circles. We advance by listening to each other's stories, discovering that a lot of the things that happen to us are shared, and if things are shared by unique human beings, it probably means that they're political, they're being imposed on a group, and if we get together, we can change them. So who knows what will happen because we were together today? We don't know. It's kind of exciting, right? I don't know. But I know that my life from the future, even though it's going to be a shorter future than yours, will be profoundly different because we were in this space together. I want to say a word about age, because I bet if people looked at us, the biggest difference maybe they would think about is age between me and you. But how I feel about you is that I just had to wait for some of my friends to be born. The truth is, in my experience, that we come into the world with enormous amounts of knowledge and wisdom and instinct and understanding. And then, of course, experience adds to that. But I hope that you have faith in the uniqueness that is inside you. All over the world, in my experience, young people, no matter how young, say things of great wisdom. They say, "It's not fair. You are not the boss of me." That is the basis of all social justice movements, and you already know that. I think it's born into us. And our struggle is to keep it from being pressed out of us by outside systems that label us by gender, for instance. I'm so glad that you started out with a dedication to the original people of this land and continuing people of this land, the Seneca, for instance. As far as I know, most of the nations that were here before Europeans came, was not that long ago, only 500 or 600 years, had languages that did not have gender. There were not gendered pronouns in their languages. There was not he and she. People were people. What a concept. If we think of vertical history in that way, if we go out and touch a rock or the earth here and realize that people once lived in a less divided way by gender, I find it helpful. Also, there was not a word for race, because race also is an invented concept. Both gender and race are invented. We can disinvent them. Our unique individual differences are way greater than our group differences. The cultures that lived here were about balance. The paradigm was the circle, not the pyramid. It was a recognition that we as human beings are linked. We are not ranked. And that helps me too to realize that it's possible. I don't by any means want to say that gender and race and class and all these things that label and divide us are not deep. They do go deep, because the good news about being human is that we're adaptable, but the bad news about being human is that we're adaptable. So when we grow up with those hierarchies, we absorb them and normalize them. So they go deep. But it does not mean that they are not invented. They are invented. And we can, in a new way, return to a circular way of living that the people on this land also knew. So I hope I can be helpful to you because of my age, because I'm an optimist, because I remember when it was worse, way worse. You've been reading about sexual harassment, and I realize that in this country, sexual harassment and sexually aggressive crimes are the only crimes that haven't diminished in Canada as well. So we understand how much we have to do. But I remember when there was no phrase sexual harassment. Didn't exist. It was just called life. Wasn't illegal, no rules against it, right? Having seen that much change, I realize we can make much more. You are inspiring to me because you have way higher standards than I do. Precisely because I remember when it was worse. I may have terminal gratitude as a kind of disease, right? And you get angrier and have higher hopes. So all of us in this room have something to learn from each other. And all of us may leave this room kind of different from when we arrived. It's exciting, no? So I thank you so much for this space and this time and this opportunity. I've never had a movie before. There was a rock band before. Right. This is a unique occasion in my life, and I so look forward to what's going to happen now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gloria, for your inspiring words. We are now entering the Q&A section of the assembly. So before we begin, I just have a few directions to share with the students and faculty and staff in the room. We handed out cue cards as you entered today. If you think of a burning question, please jot it down, and in about 15 minutes, when I indicate, please raise your hand and a prefect will come to you with the microphone. Please also say your name and grade. So Ms. Steinem, Gloria, before we open it up to questions, I'd like to start off with a couple of my own. There's been so much attention put towards feminism in the past couple months in the media. Can someone call themselves a feminist by silently thinking the right things and wearing the t-shirt? And is feminism a state of mind or a state of being?
It's all those things, don't you think? I mean, it's just the radical idea that people are people, right? So it comes to us in different ways in our lives. The truth is we probably shouldn't need a word for it. But because we're in a system that still values people by gender and race and class and sexuality, you know, all those things that you already know, we still need words to say we don't believe in that system. How we express it depends on who we are and what happens to us every day. But it just is the radical idea that people are people.
I agree. You touched on sexual assault in your address, and in recent years, many women have come forward to report sexual assault by public figures like Jian Ghomeshi and Bill Cosby. In the recent Harvey Weinstein scandal, there's been an outpouring of solidarity as women share their own personal experiences with sexual harassment. How do we, as Glenn Close said, unite to create a new culture of respect where bullies and their enablers are no longer allowed to prosper?
You know, in any way we can. But usually the first step is telling the truth about what happened to you or what happened to somebody else you know, or what you have done. You know, because we all have some kind of bias inside us, so it's not just as if we're all totally blameless. It's challenging the system. I mean, let's go back to basics here, and let's remember that gender, the idea of masculine and feminine, which did not exist in old cultures and in old languages on this continent and others, comes from the birth of different patriarchal systems. And patriarchy just means that men control reproduction and therefore control the bodies of women. And that's where gender came from. So just declaring that we have agency over our own physical selves, over our own bodies, is way more radical than it sounds, because we are seizing control of the means of reproduction. Even sounds radical, right? But that is kind of fundamental, that we have, men and women, everybody, has power to make decisions over our own physical selves. The power of the government or anybody stops at our skins. for women and men, for everybody. But it happens because women have wombs. You know, if we didn't have wombs, we'd be fine. And patriarchy is about controlling reproduction, that it's more changeful when we declare agency over our own physical selves. But I find it helpful to remember, and I'm so glad you started with the way you did, with the, you know, the history of this land, to remember that it wasn't always this way and it doesn't have to be this way.
I'd now like to open it up to the floor for questions. Several of the students across the grades have been discussing and debating various issues in anticipation of today's assembly, and we know you attended the all-girls Smith College, and Morgan in grade 12 has a question around single-gender education. Where's Morgan? Jess is bringing you the mic.
Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. My question is, as students at a single-sex school, we have the advantage of confidence we have gained from this environment. Yet, when we interact with all boys' school communities, it can be very difficult to discuss issues of feminism with young men. What role do you feel young men play in the movement, and how do we effectively open up this conversation?
No, I realize it does seem like a contradiction, doesn't it? Because I always think that groups that, you know, are at some disadvantage by race or sex or whatever deserve to have a school of our own so that you can experience authority and being the center, but that all white people, boys, men, should go to school with everybody so that they understand they're not the center of it. Right? And this seemed to me a statistical impossibility until I realized that, of course, nothing exists for the whole time. So I think it's good for women and, you know, whatever outgroup to have a time in which we are central and free and we can talk to each other, just to experience what it's like. And also to have to play all roles. You know, a woman once said to me that when she was in a group of women by themselves, she thought she was missing the presence of men, and then she realized she was missing the rest of herself because she was just missing those qualities of assertion or daring or whatever it is that she attributed to men, but because she was in a circle, all women, she had to develop them in herself. So, you know, until we get to a more equal place in the future, I think it's really important to have, to be able to choose, if we wish to, an all-female environment, an environment of, say, historically black colleges in the U.S. You know, it's important that we still have them, and you know, it's just once you get onto the fact that we can do different things at different times, it makes great sense and it's very helpful, I think, you know. And I'm glad that I went to an all-women's college, even though it existed in a previous state of consciousness. So it wasn't as great as this, let's just say. Don't ever let anybody tell you to have nostalgia for the 1950s. The 1950s were not great, right? But still, in classrooms, we probably learned to speak up in a way we would not have if we had been in classrooms of both men and women, or as we said then, girls and boys, even though we were grown-ups.
Along the same lines, Nora in grade 11 has a question.
Hello, Gloria. My question is, what do you think of Justin Trudeau's gender-based cabinet, and do you feel that Trudeau, as a cis white male, could be considered a leader of the global feminist movement?
Well, you know, I'm grateful for the advance of a balanced cabinet. I mean, obviously, that's not the whole answer because the question is consciousness. So you can also have women who are biased against women. But just having walked around the world as a female human being gives you a whole set of unique experiences that can be very valuable in making policy. So, you know, that cabinet was greeted with great celebration in the US and was part of the reason that we keep saying we're going to come here and live. We're going to seek citizenship. I'm sure you've heard that. So, you know, it's very, very important. And of course men can be feminists, because that's partly why we chose the word, rather than saying, in the beginning, people said women's liberation, women's liberationist. And then it was kind of more confusing for men to say that. And we kind of chose the word feminist because everybody could be a feminist. So I'm very grateful you have a chief of state who is a feminist. When it comes to leadership, I think we are trying to get out of hierarchies. So it is being a spokesperson for a communal nation, for a democracy. It's not being a sole leader.
On the topic of language, Darcy in grade 12 has a question about the language of feminism. Darcy's over there.
Hello. How do we move away from binaries like man and woman and include the LGBT community when shaping the language of feminism?
I think we do everything we can to get out of, you know, sometimes I think the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everything into two and those who don't. So we're trying to be just accurate, and to be accurate means that there's a thought of subtlety, right? Because there just is. It's true we can't forget that when it comes to conception and birth, there are realities of who has a womb and who doesn't. So, because that is the basis of patriarchy. After that, you know, and that doesn't, you know, it isn't like our wombs dictate our brains, or the absence of wombs dictate our brains. So we are each also unique, and that is the kind of reality that we're accounting for in our language. Someone who is born male and chooses to live as a woman gets to be called a woman. It's you know, it's a because it's a transgender experience. It is a cultural experience of living as a woman, and vice versa. So I think it's just, it's mostly a question of accuracy, don't you think? Of looking at the real situation and trying to describe it.
So I think we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the US. Charlie in grade 11 has a question for you. Charlie's over here.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I watched your speech during the Women's March, and I was so inspired by your words. I saw thousands of women across the world come together to stand for equal rights and respect, and I felt empowered. Now I see an American president who doesn't understand abortion as a woman's right to control her own body. And my question is, while President Trump is in office, will the women's movement become stronger or weaker in the US?
You know, it's very dangerous to have so far I have not called him president, okay? Because he actually lost by he actually lost by 10 million votes, 3 for Hillary Clinton and 7 for other candidates. He won because, as you know, we have this, you know, thing called the Electoral College, which is actually left over from slave states, slave-owning states, that insisted on having a higher numerical value because so many of their residents were not even citizens. I mean, we're slaves, could not vote. So it's up to us to get rid of the Electoral College, which we can do by state voting to give the electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote. So I don't accept that he is the president. But the question you ask is really interesting, and I think the answer is blowing in the wind. Will the women's movement be stronger or weaker? Certainly everything that can be done by executive order, by just signing something in the White House, is being done to weaken the movement. On the other hand, the presence of somebody who just conveniently, efficiently represents everything that's wrong has awakened and unified all kinds of women and men who thought before, well, we're doing fine, we don't have to worry about that. And so we are now woke, as we say. And personally, I have never seen such activism in my whole life. Never, never, never. It's huge, it's enormous. People are just, you know, self-energized, doing whatever they can. I mean, here's one example that made me realize something new was happening. If you'll remember when Trump put out his first anti-immigrant order before it was knocked down by the courts, there was great concern about whether people who were not citizens but were leaving the country could get back in. Within a couple of hours after he put out that order, in New York, JFK Airport, there were thousands of people at the airport stopping the planes on the tarmac, getting people out of the planes just to make sure that they knew, you know, that they could stay here, that they wouldn't be challenged when they came. But I've never seen that before. And students who used to say politics is dirty or my vote doesn't count or whatever, now are not only voting, they're running for office. Like half of classrooms on campuses in California where I work, they want to run for office. So I think the answer is blowing in the wind. But I do feel an enormous amount of energy and activism and wokeness coming from the bottom up. Nobody is anymore saying, oh, the women's movement is over, we've already, no. And also, there's much more understanding of the connections among all the issues and you know, that you can't have continuous racism without sexism because you have to maintain racial separation and control reproduction. I don't know. I mean, people are way more seeing the connections. So I feel hopeful because hope is a form of planning. You know, you have a hope which allows you to move toward it. To be pessimistic is to be defeated for openers. The answer is blowing in the wind, but we don't have to hold our finger to the wind. We can become the wind.
I think this leads perfectly into a more specific question that Tiffany in grade 12 has for you.
I'm Tiffany. What are your thoughts on the millennial generation of feminists like Beyonce, Emma Watson, and Roxane Gay, and how they communicate their messages?
Mm-hmm. I think we do the best we can wherever we are. And I'm not into saying who is a good feminist or a bad feminist or whatever. or not a feminist. You know, I know that there's all this debate going on the web. I don't know if it's so lively now, but it was about Beyonce a couple of years ago. Probably still going on. You know, Beyonce is somebody who, as a young performer, grew up isolated. You know, she was with a singing group. And the fact that she now performs with the word feminist in huge letters behind her on stage is very heartening to me. She has made these connections. She seems to have made it, especially through the writings of an African author. You know, that was the essay that she put out, and that, you know. So I feel heartened by that, and I don't think it's so helpful to say that there's one way to be a feminist, if you know what I mean. I think there are multiple, there's all of our unique ways.
Okay, so let's go to some of the younger grades. Grade 10, Stephanie.
As a student from Hong Kong and new to Canada, I like to read and learn about culture. I wonder, who is your favorite author and why?
I didn't hear the end.
Who is your favorite author and why?
Okay, it's sort of the sound bounces, right? Oh, that's so hard, isn't it? Would you be able to answer who's your favorite author? If I think about myself and who influenced me, I have to say that growing up it was Louisa May Alcott, because I wasn't going to school much until I was about 12 or so, and I read absolutely every word she wrote, both for young people and grown-ups. And I used to fantasize that she would come back to life, and what would I show her first? You know? So she had a big influence on my life. If I were to pick now, I think I would pick Alice Walker. She does, how shall I say, she did something miraculous, which is that she took the language of poor people and made it universal as a great novel. I met separately, accidentally, her translators from China and from Japan. And each of them told me that in translating her work, they used the language of their own country people, because that's the language she uses, you know, without apostrophes to say it's misspelled, but just the poetry of ordinary language. So to translate it, they had to use the language of the Ainu, who are the sort of, you might say, Native Americans of Japan, or the language of poor people in China. And in both cases, it was the first time that a great novel had been accessible to everybody. You know, that everybody could read it and love it. And to me, that's a kind of miracle, and that's who Alice is.
Okay, we're going to go to Callie in grade 11. Sarah, are you over there? Perfect.
Hi. Throughout feminist history, the goals of the movement have changed with the times. For example, emerging fourth wave feminism works to support women who choose to be stay-at-home moms, so to speak. Whereas second wave feminists such as Betty Friedan argued that choosing to be domestic was a sign of patriarchal oppression. How do you suggest the feminist movement can present a consolidated, unified front representative of all women, no matter their values?
I'm not sure I heard the last sentence, right?
How do you suggest the feminist movement can present a consolidated, united front representative of all women?
Mm-hmm. By letting women speak for themselves, you know, in all of our diversity. And by making sure what we say is universal. For instance, I would not fight for the right to women of women to stay at home and have their work valued as, raising children and so on, without fighting for the right of men to stay home, to raise children. So, because part of the way we get divided is by seeing and believing that only women can be loving and nurturing towards children, and men's authority is appropriate to the outside world. So it seems to me really crucial that children understand it's a libel on men to say they can't be loving and nurturing to children just as much as women. Of course they can. And it's important that we see that when we're growing up, so we know that it's possible. So I would just say we need to try to create the most possibilities for everybody in our language.
We need to teach empathy to everyone. We are going to go to Sophia in grade 12.
Good morning, I'm Sophia. As we are a school for students from many backgrounds and cultures, I would like to ask, can you discuss the role Black women, and in fact all women of color, have played in the feminist movement? Do you feel that at times we've been excluded from the discussion around feminism?
Again, I didn't hear the last sentence. I'm sorry,
it's
the sound
mics.
bounces. Yeah.
The mics. Sophia asked, can you discuss the role Black women, and in fact all women of color, have played in the feminist movement?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that at times we have been excluded from the dialogue around feminism?
Let me just say that in one of the early issues of Ms. Magazine, we reported a poll, a big national public opinion poll by Lewis Harris, who's a big, legitimate pollster. It was actually the first poll of U.S. women about the women's movement and feminist issues. In response to that poll, it turned out that more than 60% of Black women, of African American women, supported the women's movement and feminist issues, and only about 30% of white women. I think it has always been the case that women of color have been more likely to be feminists and more likely to lead on the issues, just statistically. I'm not saying there weren't, important white women too, but because women of color are more likely to be in the paid labor force, not to be dependent on the salary or of a man, to experience, to understand discrimination. If you've been discriminated against for one reason, you see it when it's coming at you for another. So the problem of the women's movement in the U.S. has been to be characterized in a way that isn't accurate, as if it were way more white than women of color, when actually it's been the other way around. And so together with two friends of mine who, anyway, we're trying to write a book now, which we hope is not a huge, tome, but an entertaining book that is kind of the hidden figures. Did you see this movie? It's kind of the hidden figures of the women's movement, to point out the women who have, or at least some of the women, who have always been disproportionately the pioneers in the leadership of the women's movement. And hope that, because, I know that when I was first going out to speak, partly not because I was so smart, but just because I was afraid to speak, I did so with a friend, and with one of 4 friends eventually over, a dozen years. And because we were one white woman and one Black woman speaking together, we got very much more diverse audiences than we would otherwise have had. Nonetheless, if we were on some campus and there was a little press conference, say, beforehand, we always noticed that I got questions about the women's movement and she got questions about the civil rights movement. So we would let it happen for a while, and then we would say, wait a minute, you know, we're here together, and this is what we're talking about. So it's not as if there's not racism with in the women's movement and sexism within racial justice movements. There is, but it's always been different, I would say, from the public image of the women's movement, and we're trying to make it more accurate.
Okay, let's turn it over to the audience. Does anyone have any burning questions? Please raise your card and someone. Let's go. Anna, why don't you see someone in there? Please say your name and grade.
Hi, my name's Bronte, and I'm in grade 11. And my question is, how do you think parents and communities can most effectively raise boys in order to progress or contribute to the feminist movement?
I think the key is to listen to who that boy uniquely is. You know, there's a unique person inside that child. Who is he? What does he love to do? What does he love so much he forgets what time it is when he's doing it? You know, we start to genderize so young. All the studies show that if babies cry, and even if, regardless of the sex of the baby, if one is in a pink blanket and one is in a blue blanket, then the girls get picked up and comforted more than the boys because they're subconsciously trying to toughen up the boy. You know all those studies. So the challenge is not to groupize, but to listen to the individual and understand that we all have the full circle of human qualities. If we can each develop it, then we can become who we truly are. Given the way we get divided, it's probably good to cross over the gender roles. Here, for instance, once in New York, there was a project called Oh Boy Babies. And the reason it was called Oh Boy Babies was because it was 6th grade boys who went to a child care center and took care of babies for one afternoon every week. At first, the boys said, oh, you know, babies are gross, you have to change their diapers and so on. But of course, babies are interesting, they're fascinating. And the boys loved being able to be nurturers. So the program got its name because they so looked forward to it every week. Oh boy, babies. You know, that's a way of, one of a million ways of overcoming the gender divisions.
Maybe we can take a burning question over here. Jess?
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm in grade 12. And I wonder, do you think it is better to abolish oppressive positions in society that are usually held by white men, like president, prime minister, CEO, boss, or to replace them with women and people of color?
Abolish the position or the title, you mean, or just replace the...
Yeah.
Well, it's true we do have big-time hierarchical... you know, I think it was in Iceland, for instance, the women took the political party position and behaved as if they had just elected the party, not the person. So they just switched off who was filling the position in what was the version of their Congress. I thought that was kind of a genius way, you know. Probably we can learn a lot from the cultures that were here before. I mean, our US Constitution is modeled after the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, which included the Seneca, those nations. And it was layers of consensus building circles so that there was a recognition that you needed fast action up here in fewer people, but it was built on layers of consensus. We, in the US, have not fulfilled that. For instance, there is way less attention paid to state legislatures than to what goes on in Washington. And as a result, state legislatures are very controlled by the business interests that they regulate and don't nearly as often represent the majority of opinion of the states in which they are. So there's a lot we can do within the current structure to make it way more consensual, based on consent and based on communal process.
Do we have any questions from the staff or faculty? Please
you can
raise
also
your
give me
card.
answers, you know, I could use some answers.
Are there any?
In answer to Sophia's question, you mentioned that you were afraid to speak on your own. Where did you find the confidence to be the advocate that you are?
You know, there used to be a slogan in the beginning of the women's movement, feel the fear and do it anyway. Here's, the truth is you just care about something so much that you do it, even though you are scared. I had been two things, a dancer and a writer. Those are two things you choose because you don't want to talk. But in the beginning of this great explosion of consciousness called feminism, which just meant you suddenly realize that you're not crazy, the system is crazy, I couldn't get published what I wanted to say. I just, you know, I mean, I was a freelance writer, but I just couldn't find editors who wanted to publish this. I was also beginning to get invitations from schools like this. I was afraid to do it by myself, so I did it with a friend. Because the friend was an African-American woman and a child expert who, you know, and I don't have children. I mean, we chose each other because we had different experiences. Then I learned something very important about public speaking, which is you don't die. and also, if you just tell people that you're afraid, you get, just be honest about it. You get sympathy, because actually fear of public speaking is right up there with fear of death in the public opinion polls. So if you just say, I don't know what your symptoms are, mine is that I lose all my saliva. Does that happen to you? And each tooth gets like a little Angora sweater on it, you know, that you get. So if you have something you care about, just do it and be honest about it, you know, and realize that other people share this too. And it will bond you with other people.
Can we take a question maybe from this side of the room?
Hi, my name's Kate, and my question is, who's the one partner that you worked with that inspired you the most, and why?
Oh, that's so hard. Do I have to pick one? Because, you know, there's such a multiplicity of ways in which we are inspired. I guess if I had to pick one, it would be Wilma Mankiller. Do you know who that is? She was the chief of the Cherokee Nation, and she's no longer with us, I'm sorry to say. But because it was through her that I realized, because, you know, at least the way I learned history, it didn't start when people started. It started when Europeans showed up. It started with Columbus, in my case. It was through her that I realized that much that we wanted once was here on the land where we are, and that therefore things could be different in the future. It was not human nature to be in a hierarchy in the way that we so often are. So if you want to get to know Wilma Mankiller too, you can go online. There's a feature film about her, and there's also a documentary about her. She was a great leader because she understood how to empower people to help themselves, not to tell them what to do, but to support them so they had the power to move forward.
We're having a great discussion, but we only have time for one more question. So perhaps we can go deep into the crowd and find...
I'm glad I don't have to choose.
Anna, if you can go deep into the crowd. Okay, sorry, Anna, we're taking it over here. You can pass. Perfect.
Hi, I'm Pilar. I was wondering, what is your stance on the new Quebec law implemented on Wednesday forcing Muslim women who wear niqab or burqa to uncover their faces when using any public service?
You know, I'm not familiar with the reasons here. I'm more familiar with what happened in France. And what happened in France worried me because it's possible, and again, I'm not sure that this is true here, but it's possible that a woman may only be able to go to school if she is veiled, or only be able to go out in the street if she is veiled, given the family and culture from which she comes. So that made me feel that she ought to be able to choose. If that is the way she can go to school or go out in public, she should be able to choose. But I'm not sure if those were the same circumstances here.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. We're going here, yes.
Hi, I'm Signe Matthews and I'm in grade 11. I was wondering how you would respond to someone who used the term feminazi.
Well, that's Rush Limbaugh, the only person I know who's, well, I mean, maybe there's more, but I mean, I think he invented, you know, he's a right-wing radio host. He invented the term feminazi. So I guess I would send him to the history books, where I hope he would learn that Hitler and the National Socialist Party in Germany came to power specifically against the feminist movement in Germany, which was at that time the biggest feminist movement in the world. There were more women in the Bundestag, in parliament, than in any other country proportionately. And he came to power very specifically against feminism. Kinder, Kirche, Kuchen, you know, that was the position of women, church, kitchen, children. It was all about beginning a fascist hierarchy with gender and compelling women to have children, and or at least Aryan women to have children. So I would try to give them a history lesson. I don't know how successful that would be, but otherwise I would just ignore it. I mean, such ignorance, you know, cannot possibly continue to exist. And in a way, he was kind of helpful because it was so outrageous that it made people mad, even if they didn't feel so good about feminism, you know. So, right.
I would now ask Sophia Williams and Callie Dockrell to come forward to thank Gloria on behalf of all of us. Sophia is the editor of our yearbook, The Slogan, and head of the AfroView Club, and Callie is the co-head of the Gender Studies Club.
Hi. Thank you.
Gloria, the impact of the words you share with us today will resonate through the halls of our school for days, weeks, months, and years to come. Your conviction, humility, and commitment to the empowerment of women really have resonated with us all. The insights you have graciously offered today will serve as a blueprint for how each and every one of us can do our part to further the movement as we make this crucial transition from adolescence into adulthood. Going forward, both in and out of the classroom, we will aspire to follow in your footsteps and embody the same tenacious spirit that you have exemplified. Gloria, thank you for being with our community today. In your honor, we have made a donation to the Native Women's Resource Center of Toronto, with whom we are connected. Callie has a gift on behalf of all of us as a token of our appreciation. Thank you.
As Gloria departs, I want to thank everyone for their participation today, and I invite Ms. Power to come forward for the dismissal. Thanks, Ms. Power.
Thank you. Thank you, Astrid. Okay, yes, Astrid, thank you very much. Well done. Thank you to everyone for your attention and everyone for your incredible, insightful questions. We are going to do the dismissal as per the evacuation we did last week. I'm going to ask that faculty please make sure that you go with your clans so that you can assist with the crossing of the street. So first I'd like to ask our GY reps, our prefects, GY reps, and AAPA reps to go to your posts, please. Those of you in the hallway, if you can go to your post, thank you. All right. I don't have the rock band playing at this point. I'll start with Campbell. You're going to the south single exit over there. McGregor, you're going out the back to the deck.